Hello. It's been a while since I made a video, especially a testing kind of video. The weather has been nice, so I thought I'd come out and do some back-to-back antenna tests. I've done them in the past. As I say, it's been a while. I thought, why the hell not? So today we're going to test the stock GoggleX omni antennas. Some taller omni antennas. They're the iFlight albatross 15 centimeter on the top, and the 9 centimeter albatross 2 on the bottom. And then we have the stock Walksnail V1 patches, 4 of them. They're like little triple feed patches. And then the more expensive out of all of them, the VAS Cyclops antenna, which is kind of a crosshair antenna, 4-in-1 on a little array, all pointing in the same direction. The plan is to, where I'm standing right now, fly down there, which is like a grassy, tree-covered laneway, with all of the antennas, my head facing straight down that lane, and then come back up on the other side of the hedgerow, which means at ground level, which means the signal has to penetrate the whole row of vegetation. And then I'm going to go behind me, which you can see there's a big bush here right behind me. It's about 7 or 8 meters across. I'm going to fly directly behind me with my head still pointing down the lane. And I'm going to keep going at ground level up and over to hedgerows and see what the signal strength goes to and whether or not it kind of goes to black screen. Then I'm going to come around and come back to myself, and I'm going to turn and head up in the distance there. There is a electrical pylon. It's around 850-900 meters away. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my head, so instead of facing straight down the lane, as soon as the quad comes back across my head, I'm just going to turn so my head is facing directly at the pylon. And I'm going to do that on each of the 4 tests, so my position effectively stays the same. I've marked a spot on the ground. I'm going to start by looking down the lane, and once I go along and around and back across my head and head towards the pylon, I'm just going to turn so the directional antennas and the omni antennas have a clear view of the pylon. Once I get to the pylon, I'm going to come back along and kind of, rather than coming directly back, skew across a little so the signal, I'm still going to be pointing at the pylon, but the quad is then going to be blocked by the kind of the hedge that's just there. So rather than loads and loads of vegetation covering, it'll just be kind of a tree and a couple of hedges that are maybe 3-4 meters in diameter. It's not going to be a foolproof scientific test. It's just a little bit of fun. I thought I would see what would happen with each of the antennas. So we'll give it a go. So I've just completed the 4 tests. Kind of what I expected, more or less. Let's start with the stock omni antennas. Straight away on my goggles, which are the kind of December 24 goggles, so the version with the internal 9-axis gyro, so no need for the extension module, not the absolute latest goggles that have slightly different RAM memory in them, but more or less the latest goggles. The signal bars were orange. I was running on channel 1 on all of the tests. I did notice channel 3 was green, but I stayed with channel 1. Which was orange. Took off, bitrate kind of did what I expected it to do. Turning when the quad turns and the antennas aren't quite perfectly aligned. Bitrate dropped and it stuttered. At the end of the lane, you'll see it kind of stuttered at like 1-2 megabits per second. And then flying along behind myself at groundish level, it ended up fail-safing. But once it got up above the trees, the bitrate came back and it kind of wasn't too bad. Heading over to the pylon, again, bitrate wasn't too bad, good clear line of sight. The turn at 1 kilometre, or 850 metres, again, when the antennas just weren't quite orientated, kind of perpendicular to each other, the bitrate dropped again and it stuttered a little bit. And on the way back, with just a little bit of hedge obscuring it, bitrate was kind of 7 and then climbed to 14. And only when it got quite close did it come to 25. With the taller antennas, everything was a lot better. All the signals on the channels were green, and the bit rates were all probably 1 or 2 megabits per second better, and performed actually quite well. I don't know whether that's the quality of the antennas or because the taller antennas were up clear of my head. I do have some other antennas there. I maybe get round to testing some better quality omnis compared to the ones that I have. But compared to the stock, things were better. Moving on to the patch antennas, the Walksnail directional, little triple feed patches. I think they're around 8.5 dBm. Again, things for me were a little bit better. I was able to fly directly behind myself, just as far as the omnis. So kind of the myth where, oh, well, patches only see one direction. Well, they still see behind themselves a fair oil distance. And to be honest, for what I'm generally flying here, the ability of it to be able to see behind up to that kind of third hedgerow is more than adequate for me to not really need omnis. I just stick with patch antennas. Again, all the bit rates were a little bit better, especially when the quad was in front of the goggles, and over to the pylon and back again, things were better. And the VAS Cyclops, I think, kind of just about performed the best out of the lot. Bit rates held better when the quad antennas weren't perpendicular to the goggle antennas. Signal bars were green on the way out and on the way back from the wind turbine. The bit rates, I think from memory, were around 25, more or less the whole way there and the whole way back. So generally speaking, a lot better. So out of the 4 antennas that I tested, what actually performed the best? Well, on kind of this little test, it was the VAS Cyclops antennas. The question, however, though, for me, is does the cost and the benefit correlate to each other? The VAS Cyclops is a significantly more expensive antenna than the Walksnail, and kind of the equivalent true RC antennas would be a significantly more expensive antenna than the Walksnail ones. And yes, it performed better, but I think they were maybe like 4 or 5 times more expensive. Did it perform 4 or 5 times better? I'm not really sure it did. So for me, on the whole, in this test, the little Walksnail patches, I think, were probably the best bang for buck out of them all. I'm still going to run the VAS Cyclops because I own them and they're handy. They fit in my box with them on, so they're convenient. But I think if I was to go out and buy, and I didn't buy them brand new, I bought them off eBay for like 35 quid, so it wasn't so bad for me. But I'm not quite sure the really expensive antennas are the significantly better enough to warrant the cost. I think little kind of triple feed patch antennas are probably still your best bang for buck. Right, anyway, that's just another quick ramble video. See you in the next one.